The hot sun beat down on the dusty ground of New Colorado. This planet sat on the edge of human space, where the safe zones ended and the wild frontier began. Most people avoided this place, but Sandra Martinez had no choice. Her cargo ship needed fuel, and Murphy's Gas and Gear was the only station for 300 miles. Sandra pulled her transport ship up to the fuel pumps and shut off the engines. The silence hit her like a wall after hours of engine noise. She stretched her tired muscles and looked around. The gas station looked old and worn down. Paint peeled off the walls and rust covered the metal parts. A few other ships sat in the parking area, but most looked empty. She stepped out of her ship and felt the heat immediately. New Colorado was always hot during the day. Sandra wore simple work clothes, faded pants, a plain shirt, and old boots. She looked like any other cargo hauler trying to make a living on the frontier. Nobody would guess she used to be a military officer. Her ship carried medical supplies bound for the outer colonies. Children's hospitals needed these drugs and equipment badly. Pirates and raiders often attacked supply ships, so Sandra tried to keep a low profile. She dressed plain and flew an ordinary-looking transport. Better to look boring than rich. Sandra walked toward the station building. The sign above the door read, "Murphy's Gas and Gear, Fuel, Food, and Repairs." Through the dusty windows, she could see a man behind the counter. He looked nervous, like most people who lived on the frontier. Out here, you never knew what kind of trouble might roll up to your door. The station sold more than just fuel. Shelves held canned food, basic tools, and cheap electronics. A repair bay sat off to one side where mechanics could fix damaged ships. A few tables and chairs made up a small restaurant area. The coffee smelled old, but Sandra had tasted worse. She filled out the fuel order form and handed it to the owner. His name tag said, Pete Williams. He was a thin man with gray hair and worried eyes. His hands shook slightly as he took the form. "Heading to the outer colonies?" Pete asked, trying to make conversation. "Yeah," Sandra replied, keeping her answer short. She had learned not to give too much information to strangers. "Medical supplies." Pete nodded. "Good work. Those colonies need all the help they can get." He started the fuel pumps. "Should take about 20 minutes to fill your tanks." Sandra paid in advance and bought a bottle of cold water. The heat made her thirsty, and she had a long flight ahead. She walked back outside to check on her ship while the fuel pumped. That's when she heard the sound that made her blood run cold. The deep rumble of hoverbike engines echoed across the empty landscape. Sandra looked up and saw dust clouds on the horizon. Something was coming fast, and from the sound, it was big. She counted at least 6 or 7 engines, maybe more. Pete Williams appeared in the doorway, his face pale with fear. "Oh no," he whispered. "Not them. Not today." "Who?" Sandra asked, though she already had a bad feeling about the answer. "Zephyrian raiders," Pete said. "They've been hitting settlements all along the border. Purple-skinned aliens with bad attitudes. And big weapons." Sandra felt her old training kick in. She quickly scanned the area looking for cover and escape routes. Her ship was tied to the fuel pumps, so she couldn't leave quickly. The station building offered some protection, but not much. A few other ships sat in the parking area, but their owners were nowhere to be seen. The sound of engines grew louder. Sandra could see them now. 7 hoverbikes racing toward the station. Each bike carried a rider wearing black leather and metal armor. Even from a distance, she could see their purple skin and the weapons strapped to their backs. "Get inside," Sandra told Pete. "Lock the doors and stay down." But Pete was already running back into the station. Sandra heard the click of locks and the sound of furniture being moved against the door. Smart man. The Zephyrian bikers roared into the station parking area in a cloud of dust and engine noise. They rode in formation, like a military unit. Their hoverbikes were big, loud machines painted in dark colors. Each bike had weapons mounted on the front and sides. The lead rider was bigger than the others. Scars covered his purple face and metal teeth gleamed when he smiled. His bike was the loudest and most heavily armed. He wore the markings of a pack leader. Sandra stood her ground next to her ship. She kept her hands visible and tried to look calm. Inside, her heart was racing, but years of military training had taught her to control her fear. The bikers shut off their engines and climbed off their bikes. They moved like predators, spreading out to surround her. Sandra counted 7 of them, all armed with energy weapons and bladed weapons. Their leader stepped forward. Well, he said in broken standard language. What do we have here? A little human, all alone. His voice was rough and harsh. Other Zephyrians laughed and made crude comments in their own language. Sandra understood some of it, but she kept that knowledge to herself. Just getting fuel, Sandra said calmly. I'll be leaving soon. Oh, I don't think so, the leader replied. He looked at her ship and grinned, showing those metal teeth. Nice cargo ship. Bet it's carrying something valuable. The other raiders moved closer, forming a tight circle around Sandra. She could smell their unwashed bodies and the oil from their machines. They were trying to intimidate her, and it might have worked on someone else. But Sandra Martinez had faced down worse enemies than these. She had fought in real wars, seen real battles, and survived things that would break most people. Still, she needed to be careful. 7 armed aliens against 1 person were bad odds even for someone with her training. Look, she said, keeping her voice steady. I don't want any trouble. I'm just a cargo hauler trying to make a living. The Zephyrian leader laughed. Cargo hauler? You look like military to me. The way you stand, the way you watch us. You've seen combat. Sandra felt a chill. These weren't just random raiders. They were smart enough to read body language and spot trained fighters. That made them much more dangerous. The fuel pump clicked off, signaling that her tanks were full. Sandra glanced at her ship, calculating distances and angles. She was still connected to the fuel line, which would slow her escape. Time to pay. The toll, human, the leader said, pulling out a wicked-looking blade. This is our territory now. Across the gas station parking area, another man watched the scene unfold. He stood beside a sleek black ship that looked nothing like the other cargo haulers. This ship was built for speed and stealth, with clean lines and expensive modifications. Most people would have run at the first sign of trouble, but this man stayed perfectly still. His name was Jake Rivers, though very few people in the galaxy knew that anymore. To most, he was dead. Killed 3 years ago during something called the Centauri incident. The official report said his body was never found, lost in the explosion of a space station. The military had even held a funeral for him. But Jake Rivers was very much alive. He had dark hair, sharp eyes, and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen too much violence. He wore simple black clothes that looked ordinary, but hid advanced body armor underneath. A plasma pistol sat concealed under his jacket, along with other weapons most people couldn't even identify. Jake had been refueling his interceptor when the Zephyrian bikers arrived. He could have left. His ship was fast enough to outrun anything, the aliens had. But something made him stay and watch. The woman being surrounded by the raiders looked familiar. Jake studied her face, her posture, the way she held herself even under threat. Recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. Sandra Martinez. He hadn't seen her in 5 years, not since the end of the Titan Wars. She looked older now, more weathered, by years of hard work. Her dark hair was shorter and she had new scars on her hands. But Jake would know her anywhere. They had served together in the worst battles of the war. He had seen her fight off entire enemy squads and carry wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire. Sandra Martinez was one of the toughest people Jake had ever known. She could handle herself in any fight. But 7 armed Zephyrians were dangerous, even for someone with her skills. Jake moved slightly to get a better view. His hand drifted toward his concealed weapon, ready to act if needed. But part of him was curious. He wanted to see how Sandra would handle this situation. Would she fight, or try to talk her way out? Inside the gas station, Pete Williams crouched, behind his counter. Jake could see him through the dirty windows, his face pale with terror. Pete had seen what Zephyrian raiders did to people who resisted them. The man probably expected the worst. A few other beings had been at the station when the bikers arrived. An insect-like Thraxian had quickly scuttled to his ship and taken off without even finishing his fuel purchase. Two reptilian traders had locked themselves inside their cargo hauler. A lone human trucker had abandoned his meal and hidden in the bathroom. Everyone expected this to end badly for Sandra. Humans had a reputation in this part of the galaxy. People saw them as weak, soft creatures who had gotten lucky in a few wars. Most aliens thought humans succeeded through technology, and numbers, not individual strength. Jake knew better. He had fought alongside humans in battles that would give most aliens nightmares. He had seen what humans could do when pushed too far. The galaxy had no idea what they were really dealing with. The Zephyrian leader was talking now, making demands and threats. His gang laughed at their crude jokes about human weakness. They clearly thought this would be easy. Just another soft human to push around and rob. Jake almost felt sorry for them. Almost. He checked his equipment without being obvious about it. His plasma pistol was fully charged. The knife on his belt was sharp enough to cut through alien armor. His body armor would stop most energy weapons. If this turned into a fight, he was ready. But Jake had learned patience during his years of secret operations. He wouldn't move unless Sandra truly needed help. She was a trained soldier, a veteran of multiple wars. She deserved the chance to handle this herself. The fuel pump next to Sandra's ship clicked off. Her tanks were full now, but she was still connected to the fuel line. That would slow her down if she needed to escape quickly. The Zephyrians probably knew that too. Jake noticed other details that worried him. The aliens' weapons were military grade, not the cheap knockoffs most raiders carried. Their armor looked new and well maintained. Their hover bikes had recent modifications that cost serious money. This wasn't just a random gang of thugs. These Zephyrians were organized, professional. They moved like soldiers, not common criminals. That made them much more dangerous. Jake had been tracking unusual Zephyrian activity for months. Groups of them had been appearing all along the human frontier, testing defenses and gathering information. This looked like another intelligence-gathering mission disguised as simple harassment. The leader was studying Sandra carefully now. He could tell she wasn't an ordinary cargo hauler. Her stance, her calm reaction to threats, her military bearing, all of it screamed trained fighter. The alien was smart enough to recognize danger when he saw it. That worried Jake more than anything. Stupid criminals were predictable. Smart ones were willing to kill to protect their secrets. Sandra was saying something about just wanting to leave peacefully. She offered to pay a toll and go on her way. The reasonable approach, standard diplomatic procedure for dealing with hostile contacts. Jake had seen her use the same tactics during the war when they encountered enemy civilians. But the Zephyrians weren't interested in reasonable solutions. Their leader pulled out an energy blade, the weapon humming with deadly power. The other raiders tensed, ready for violence. Whatever game they were playing, it was about to turn serious. Jake's muscles coiled like springs. His hand moved closer to his weapon. Still, he held back. Sandra was handling this by the book so far. She hadn't escalated to violence, which meant she was still trying to avoid a fight. Smart. Even someone with her skills faced long odds against 7 armed opponents. Better to talk first and fight only as a last resort. Through the station windows, Jake saw Pete Williams pull out what looked like a communication device, probably trying to call for help. But the nearest security forces were hours away. Whatever happened here would be over long before anyone arrived. A hot wind blew across the parking area, stirring up dust and carrying the smell of fuel and alien sweat. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Jake had been in situations like this before. The moment before violence erupted always felt the same. Time seemed to slow down. Every detail became crystal clear. The world held its breath. He just hoped Sandra was ready for what was coming. The Zephyrian leader stepped closer to Sandra, his energy blade crackling with blue light. The weapon made a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. His purple face twisted into an ugly grin, showing those metal teeth that caught the sunlight. "You hear that sound, human?" he asked, holding the blade near her face. "That's the sound of your death coming closer." Sandra didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, her eyes focused on the alien's face rather than the weapon. Years of combat. Training had taught her never to show fear to an enemy. Fear was weakness, and weakness got you killed. "I offered to pay your toll," she said calmly. "What more do you want?" The leader laughed, a harsh sound like grinding metal. "What I want is respect. Humans think they own this part of space. Time to learn different." Behind him, the other raiders spread out in a wider circle. They pulled out their own weapons: energy pistols, vibro knives, and clubs with metal spikes. Sandra counted 7 enemies, all armed and ready for violence. Not good odds for anyone. One of the younger Zephyrians, eager to impress his leader, grabbed Sandra's arm. His grip was strong enough to leave bruises, and his claws dug into her skin through the fabric of her shirt. "Look at her," he said in his own language. "So small and weak, like all humans." Sandra understood every word, but she kept that knowledge hidden. Let them think she was just another ignorant human who couldn't speak their language. Information was a weapon, and she needed every advantage she could get. The leader noticed something else that interested him. Sandra's cargo ship sat with its loading bay partially open. Through the gap, he could see metal containers marked with medical symbols. "What's in those boxes, human?" he demanded. "Medical supplies," Sandra answered truthfully. "Antibiotics, surgical equipment, vaccines for children." The alien's grin grew wider. "Medicine? That's valuable stuff, worth a lot of money on the black market." He gestured to 2 of his followers. They moved toward Sandra's ship, their intentions clear. They planned to steal her cargo, the same supplies that sick children in the outer colonies desperately needed. "Those supplies are for hospitals," Sandra said, her voice still controlled but with an edge of steel creeping in. "Children will die without them." "Not my problem," the leader replied with a shrug. "Business is business." The 2 raiders reached Sandra's ship and started pulling out containers. They handled the delicate medical equipment roughly, dropping boxes and kicking aside anything they didn't immediately recognize as valuable. One container broke open, spilling sterile bandages onto the dirty ground. Sandra watched her carefully packed cargo being destroyed and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had seen too many children die from preventable diseases during the war. These supplies could save hundreds of lives. "Careful with that," she said. "Some of those medicines need special storage conditions." The leader found this amusing. "Giving us orders now? You're not in charge here, human." One of the raiders by her ship held up a container of vaccines. Without warning, he threw it hard against the ground. The container shattered, and precious medicine soaked into the dirt. Vaccines that could have prevented deadly diseases in dozens of children gone. "Oops," the raider said, laughing. That was when Sandra's careful control began to crack. Her hands clenched into fists. Her breathing changed slightly. Small signs that most people wouldn't notice, but Jake Rivers saw them from across the parking area. He recognized the warning signs. Sandra was reaching her breaking point. The Zephyrian leader noticed the change too. He had enough experience with violence to read body language. The human woman was getting angry, which could make her dangerous or stupid. Either way, it might be entertaining. He grabbed Sandra by the throat with one large purple hand. His claws pressed against her skin just hard enough to draw tiny drops of blood. The energy blade in his other hand moved closer to her face. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his breath hot and rank. "We take your cargo and your ship. You walk away if you're smart. Try to stop us and we'll see how tough humans really are." Inside the gas station, Pete Williams had managed to get a message out on his emergency communicator. But the response was not encouraging. The nearest security patrol was 4 hours away. Local law enforcement was stretched thin across the frontier, and Murphy's Gas and Gear was at the bottom of their priority list. Pete pressed his face against the window, watching the confrontation outside. He felt sick with guilt for hiding while the woman faced danger alone, but what could he do? He was just a gas station owner, not a fighter. Other people were watching too. The reptilian traders had cracked open their ship's door to peer out. The human trucker was recording everything with his communication device, probably planning to sell the footage to news networks later. Violence involving humans always drew attention in the galactic media. The Zephyrian leader increased his grip on Sandra's throat. I'm waiting for an answer, human, your cargo and ship or your life. Choose now. Sandra looked into his alien eyes and saw the truth there. This wasn't just about robbery. These raiders enjoyed causing pain and fear. They would take her cargo regardless of what she said or did. The only question was whether they would kill her afterward. Around them, the other Zephyrians grew more excited. They could sense that violence was coming. Some of them started making bets in their own language about how long the human would last in a fight. The broken vaccine container lay in the dirt at Sandra's feet, its contents wasted. Children would die because of what these aliens had done. That thought burned in her mind like acid. Well, the leader demanded. What's your answer? Sandra looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was completely different. Gone was the reasonable cargo hauler trying to avoid trouble. What replaced it was something cold and hard as military steel. My answer, she said quietly, is that you made a mistake. The Zephyrian leader blinked in surprise. What? You should have taken the toll and let me go, Sandra continued, her voice never rising above a whisper. Now it's too late. Across the parking area, Jake Rivers straightened up. He knew that tone of voice. He had heard it before, right before. Sandra Martinez turned into one of the most dangerous people in human space. The show was about to begin. Sandra Martinez looked directly into the Zephyrian leader's yellow eyes. When she spoke again, the words came out in perfect Zephyrian language, with the proper accent and grammar that only came from years of study. Remove your blade from my throat, child, before I remove your arm from your body. The effect was immediate and shocking. Every Zephyrian in the circle froze. Their leader's grip on Sandra's throat loosened in surprise. Very few humans could speak their language at all, and even fewer spoke it this well. The words she had chosen were especially insulting in their culture. You speak Zephyrian? The leader stammered. I speak 7 alien languages, Sandra replied, still in his native tongue. I also know that your name is Vextar the Bloody, and you have a price on your head in 12-star systems. Vextar's purple face went pale. How could this human cargo hauler know his real name? He was supposed to be operating under false identity. His gang only knew him by his nickname. Sandra continued talking, her voice getting colder with each sentence. I know you were exiled from the Zephyrian homeworld for crimes against your own people. I know you've been raiding human settlements for 6 months, and I know you just made the biggest mistake of your worthless life. The other raiders looked confused and worried. Their leader was supposed to be in control of the situation, but the human woman was talking to him like he was the one in trouble. That's when Sandra moved. Years of military training kicked in like a switch being flipped. Her right hand shot up and grabbed Vextar's wrist, the one holding the energy blade. At the same time, her left elbow drove hard into his stomach, doubling him over with a grunt of pain. Sandra twisted his wrist with precision, using a joint lock she had learned in close combat training. Vextar screamed as bones cracked, and the energy blade flew from his grip. The weapon spun through the air and crashed into a fuel pump, sending sparks flying in all directions. The blade's energy cell ruptured on impact. Blue electricity arced across the metal pumps, and the smell of ozone filled the air. For a moment, everyone thought the fuel might explode. But the safety systems kicked in and shut off the flow. The whole exchange took less than 3 seconds. The other 6 Zephyrians stared in shock for a heartbeat, then attacked, all at once. They came at Sandra from every direction, weapons raised and ready to kill. Sandra Martinez became a blur of controlled violence. The first raider came at her with a vibro knife. Sandra ducked under his swing and drove her fist into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The alien doubled over, gasping for air. Sandra grabbed his knife hand and twisted until he dropped the weapon, then swept his legs out from under him. The second attacker tried to shoot her with an energy pistol. Sandra was already moving before he could aim properly. She rolled to the side, came up behind him, and delivered a perfect nerve strike to his neck. The Zephyrian collapsed like his strings had been cut. 2 more raiders rushed her together, thinking numbers would work in their favor. Sandra used their momentum against them. She grabbed the first one's arm as he swung a metal club, spinning him around and sending him crashing into his partner. Both aliens went down in a tangle of limbs. The fifth raider was smarter. He stayed back and tried to line up a clear shot with his energy rifle. Sandra saw the danger and acted fast. She picked up a wrench from Pete's tool cart and threw it with perfect accuracy. The heavy tool struck the alien's weapon, knocking it from his hands and breaking several of his fingers. Before he could recover, Sandra was on him. A quick combination of strikes left him unconscious on the ground. The last raider, seeing his entire gang defeated in less than 2 minutes, tried to run for his hoverbike. Sandra let him get halfway there before she moved. She sprinted after him with the speed of someone who had trained for years in Earth's heavy gravity. The alien was fast, but Sandra was faster. She tackled him from behind, sending both of them rolling across the dusty ground. When they stopped rolling, Sandra was on top with her forearm pressed against his throat. "Stay down," she ordered in Zephyrian. "Move and I'll break your neck." The raider looked into her eyes and saw his own death waiting there. He went completely still. Sandra stood up slowly, breathing hard but not exhausted. Around her, 7 Zephyrian raiders lay groaning on the ground. Some were unconscious. Others were awake but too hurt to move. Their leader, Vex Tar, sat holding his broken wrist and staring at her with a mixture of fear and amazement. "Impossible," he whispered. "You're just a human. Humans are weak." Sandra walked over to him and crouched down so they were at eye level. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Colonel Sandra Martinez, formerly of the 15th Human Shock Marines. I served in the Titan Wars, the Kepler Campaign, and the Siege of Europa Station. I have killed more aliens in combat than you have fingers and toes." She gestured toward her damaged cargo ship. "Those medical supplies you destroyed were bound for children's hospitals in the outer colonies. Sick children who will now suffer because of your greed and stupidity." Vextar's eyes went wide. Even on the frontier, people had heard stories about the Human Shock Marines. They were legendary for their toughness and skill in battle. No wonder this woman had defeated his entire gang. "You should have accepted my offer to pay a toll and leave peacefully," Sandra continued. "Instead, you chose violence against a non-combatant, carrying humanitarian supplies. That was a war crime." Around the gas station, the hidden witnesses began to emerge. Pete Williams came out from behind his counter, his mouth hanging open in amazement. The reptilian traders crept out of their ship to stare at the defeated raiders. Even the human trucker came out of the bathroom, still recording everything with his device. None of them had ever seen anything like what they had just witnessed. One human woman had single-handedly defeated 7 armed aliens in less than 3 minutes. It was like watching a legend come to life. Sandra stood up and looked around at the crowd. "Someone call system security. Tell them Sandra Martinez has captured the Zephyrian raider known as Vextar the Bloody. They'll want to collect the bounty on his head." That's when she heard slow clapping from across the parking area. Sandra spun around to see a man in black clothes walking toward her. His face was familiar, but it couldn't be who she thought it was. The man was supposed to be dead. Sandra Martinez stared at the man walking toward her across the dusty parking lot. Her heart hammered in her chest. It couldn't be him. Jake Rivers was dead. She had attended his funeral 3 years ago. She had watched them lower an empty coffin into the ground while military officers played sad music. "Hello, Sandra," Jake said simply, his voice exactly as she remembered it. Still impressive as always. "Jake?" Sandra's voice came out as a whisper. "But you're dead. Everyone knows you died at Centauri Station." Jake stopped a few feet away from her. He looked older than she remembered. New scars marked his face and his eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much violence. But it was definitely him. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," he said with a small smile. "Though I had good reasons to let people believe it." Around them, the defeated Zephyrian raiders groaned on the ground. Vexitar was still staring at Sandra in shock, unable to believe what had happened to his gang. The other witnesses watched the reunion with growing amazement. Pete Williams recognized Jake's face immediately. Everyone in human space knew those features from news reports and military documentaries. Jake Rivers had been famous even before his supposed death. The best special operations agent humanity had ever produced. The Ghost. Pete whispered. You're really the Ghost. Jake glanced at the gas station owner but didn't respond to the nickname. He kept his attention focused on Sandra. They had too much history together to ignore, and too many questions that needed answers. How long have you been watching? Sandra asked. Since the raiders arrived, Jake replied. I was refueling my ship when they showed up. I recognized you immediately. Sandra felt a mix of emotions, relief that her old friend was alive, anger that he had let her believe he was dead for 3 years, confusion about why he was here at this exact moment. You could have helped sooner, she said. You didn't need help, Jake replied matter-of-factly. I've seen you handle worse odds than 7 raiders. Besides, I was curious to see how you'd approach the situation. That was typical Jake Rivers, always thinking several steps ahead, always gathering information before acting. It had made him an excellent special operations agent, but sometimes it frustrated his friends. Sandra looked down at the groaning Zephyrians scattered around her feet. This wasn't random, was it? They weren't just common raiders looking for easy targets? No, Jake confirmed. They weren't. These particular aliens have been operating along the frontier for months, but not for simple robbery. They've been gathering intelligence. Jake walked over to Vextar and crouched down next to the injured alien leader. He pulled out a small, scanning device and ran it over the Zephyrians' equipment. The device beeped several times before displaying information on its screen. Just as I thought, Jake said. Military-grade communication equipment, long-range sensors, data storage devices with encryption protocols. This gang was collecting information about human defenses and shipping routes. Sandra felt a chill run down her spine. Intelligence gathering for what purpose? That's what I've been trying to find out, Jake replied. He stood up and looked at her seriously. For the past 6 months, I've been tracking unusual Zephyrian activity all along the border. Small groups like this one, testing human responses and mapping our capabilities. Vextar tried to speak, but Sandra silenced him with a look that promised violence if he interrupted. The alien leader decided to stay quiet. Jake continued his explanation. The pattern suggests preparation for something bigger, coordinated attacks, maybe even a full invasion, but they needed to know how humans would respond to pressure in isolated areas, and they chose to test it by harassing a cargo hauler at a gas station, Sandra said. They thought they were testing a civilian, Jake corrected. They had no idea they were about to encounter Colonel Sandra Martinez, hero of the Titan Wars. Sandra winced at the title. She had left military service to get away from that kind of recognition. Being called a hero always made her uncomfortable, especially when she thought about the friends who hadn't made it home from those wars. I'm not a colonel anymore, she said. Just a cargo hauler trying to deliver medical supplies. The galaxy doesn't work that way, Jake replied gently. Once you're a warrior, you're always a warrior. Skills like yours don't just disappear because you change jobs. Pete Williams had been listening to their conversation with growing excitement. This was the biggest thing that had ever happened at his gas station. 2 legendary human fighters meeting by chance to stop alien raiders. It was like something out of a movie. Should I still call system security? Pete asked nervously. Yes, Sandra answered. These raiders need to be properly arrested and questioned. There might be bounties on some of them. Jake nodded agreement, but his expression remained serious. We also need to share what we've learned about their intelligence gathering operation. This information could prevent attacks on other human settlements. One of the conscious Zephyrian raiders tried to crawl toward his hover bike. Sandra noticed the movement and walked over to him. She placed her boot firmly on his back, pressing him flat against the ground. Stay put, she ordered in Zephyrian. You're under arrest for piracy, assault, and destruction of humanitarian supplies. The alien stopped struggling immediately. Word was already spreading among the gang that this human woman was far more dangerous than she looked. Jake watched Sandra handle the prisoner and felt a familiar sense of pride. They had served together in some of the worst battles of the war, and She had never failed to impress him with her skill and dedication. "I've missed working with you," he said quietly. Sandra looked at him with mixed emotions. "I thought you were dead, Jake. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To all of us who served with you?" "I'm sorry," Jake replied, and he meant it. "I had to disappear completely to do this job. If anyone knew I was alive, it would have compromised the mission." "What mission?" Sandra demanded. Jake glanced around at the witnesses and the recording devices. "Not here. Too many ears and eyes. But I can tell you this much. What happened today wasn't coincidence. I've been tracking these particular raiders for weeks." "You knew they would be here?" "I suspected they might hit this station eventually. It's a perfect target. Isolated, lightly defended, and on a major shipping route. I've been waiting for them to make their move." Sandra realized the implications. "You used me as bait." "No," Jake said firmly. "I had no idea you would be here today. That was pure chance. But when I saw you, I decided to let events play out naturally. I wanted to see what these aliens would do when faced with apparent weakness. And instead, they got a demonstration of human military training," Sandra said. "The best possible outcome." Jake agreed. "Now they know that even our civilians can be dangerous when threatened." In the distance, they could hear the sound of approaching aircraft. System security was finally arriving, drawn by Pete's emergency call and the reports of violence at the gas station. Jake looked at his old friend and made a decision. "Sandra, I need to ask you something important. How would you feel about coming out of retirement for one more mission?" Sandra looked at Jake for a long moment before answering his question. The sound of approaching security aircraft grew louder, but they still had a few minutes before the authorities arrived. "What kind of mission?" she asked. "The kind that might prevent a war," Jake replied seriously. "These raiders were just the beginning. I've been tracking similar operations across 12 star systems. Someone is preparing for coordinated attacks on human colonies." Sandra glanced down at the defeated Zephyrian raiders scattered around her feet. Vexitar was still conscious, holding his broken wrist and listening to every word they said. She had an idea. "Before we talk about missions, let's finish this job properly," she said. "Help me question these aliens. I want to know who's really behind this operation." Jake nodded and pulled out a small device from his jacket. It looked like a simple scanner, but Sandra recognized military interrogation equipment when she saw it. The device could detect lies by reading alien biological responses. They started with Vexitar. Sandra crouched down next to the injured leader and spoke to him in perfect Zephyrian. "You have two choices," she said calmly. "Tell us who hired you to gather intelligence on human defenses, or spend the rest of your life in a prison colony. Your decision." Vexitar tried to look defiant, but the fear in his yellow eyes gave him away. He had never expected to face two of humanity's most dangerous operatives at a frontier gas station. "I don't know what you're talking about," he lied. "We're just raiders looking for easy targets." Jake's device beeped, indicating deception. Sandra smiled coldly. "Try again," she said. "And remember, I've fought in 3 wars and killed more aliens than you've probably ever met. I don't have patience for lies." Under pressure from both humans, Vexitar's resolve cracked. The story that came out was worse than either Sandra or Jake had expected. The Zephyrian raiders were part of a much larger conspiracy. Representatives from 6 different alien species had been secretly meeting for months, planning coordinated strikes against human settlements. They called themselves the Coalition for Galactic Balance. "They say humans are growing too powerful," Vexitar admitted reluctantly. "Spreading too fast, claiming too much territory. The coalition wants to push you back to your home systems." "Who leads this coalition?" Jake demanded. "I don't know names," Vexitar said, "but they have money, weapons, and ships. Lots of ships." Sandra and Jake exchanged worried looks. A coordinated attack by multiple alien species would be humanity's worst nightmare. Even with their military strength, humans were still outnumbered across the galaxy. Jake's scanner showed that Vexitar was telling the truth this time. The alien leader really didn't know the coalition's leadership, but his information confirmed Jake's worst fears about the scope of the threat. The security aircraft finally arrived, landing in clouds of dust around the gas station. Armed officers jumped out and secured the area. Their leader, a stern-faced woman named Captain Lisa Park, approached Sandra and Jake. "I'm Captain Park, Frontier Security," she announced. "We received reports of violence and captured criminals." Sandra gestured toward the defeated raiders. 7 Zephyrian pirates, including Vextar the Bloody. They attacked a humanitarian cargo shipment and threatened civilian lives. Captain Park's eyes widened when she heard the name. Vextar had bounties on his head in multiple star systems. Capturing him would be a major success for Frontier Security. "Outstanding work," Captain Park said. Then she looked more closely at Sandra and Jake. Recognition dawned on her face. "Wait, you're Sandra Martinez but you're supposed to be dead." "It's complicated," Jake replied. "Right now we need to transfer these prisoners and their equipment to military intelligence. They have information about a larger threat to human colonies." While the security officers arrested the raiders and secured their equipment, Sandra made a difficult decision. She looked at her damaged cargo ship and the scattered medical supplies. "My delivery schedule is ruined," she said. "Some of those medicines can't be replaced quickly. Children are going to suffer because of what happened here." Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll make sure replacement supplies reach those colonies. Military medical can expedite emergency shipments." "That's not the point," Sandra replied. "This was supposed to be simple cargo hauling, peaceful work, but everywhere I go, violence follows." "Violence followed because evil people made evil choices," Jake corrected. "You didn't start this fight. You just finished it." Pete Williams had been watching the cleanup operation with amazement. His quiet gas station had become the center of galactic attention. News crews were already on their way to interview him about the battle. "Ma'am," Pete said to Sandra, "I just wanted to thank you. Those raiders would have killed me after they finished with you. You saved my life." Sandra accepted his thanks with a nod, but her mind was already working on bigger problems. The coalition threat was real, and someone needed to stop it before innocent people died. "Jake," she said finally, "tell me about this mission." "We need to infiltrate the coalition and learn their plans," Jake explained. "Find out when and where they plan to attack. Your linguistic skills and combat experience would be invaluable." "And then what? Just the 2 of us against 6 alien species?" "We wouldn't be fighting them directly," Jake assured her. "We'd be gathering intelligence so that proper military forces can respond effectively. Prevention instead of reaction." Sandra looked around at the gas station, the defeated raiders, and the scattered medical supplies. This had started as a simple fuel stop and turned into a demonstration of human capability. Maybe that was a sign. "All right," she said. "One more mission. But after this, I'm really retiring." Jake smiled for the first time since revealing himself. "Deal." As the security teams finished loading the prisoners into their aircraft, word of the battle began spreading across the galaxy. Pete Williams told his story to anyone who would listen, and the details grew more impressive with each telling. The human trucker who had recorded everything sold his footage to news networks. Within hours, beings across multiple star systems were watching Sandra Martinez single-handedly defeat 7 armed raiders. The message was clear. Humans might appear peaceful, but they hadn't forgotten how to fight. Anyone who threatened human civilians did so at their own risk. In the Coalition's secret meeting chambers, alien leaders watched the same footage with growing concern. Their intelligence-gathering operation had backfired spectacularly. Instead of finding human weakness, they had discovered human strength. Some Coalition members began to reconsider their plans. Maybe pushing humanity too hard wasn't such a good idea after all. At Murphy's Gas and Gear, Pete Williams hung a new sign next to his front door. Site of the Battle of New Colorado, where Sandra Martinez and the Ghost saved the day. It wasn't exactly accurate, but it was close enough for legend. And sometimes legends were more powerful than facts. The galaxy had been reminded of an important truth. Humanity protected its own, and those who forgot that lesson did so at their peril.